Have you heard this vampire story? The middle part of the story is the most interesting part. Do you know? I had just moved to a small, quiet, and desolate town. As soon as I arrived, I heard strange stories about an old house on the hilltop, where people said that the shadow of a strange creature always glided through the walls at night. I didn't believe in such supernatural things, but the more I heard, the more curious I became. So, I decided I had to explore the house. Beginning the journey, there was something strange. Even though I was always curious about the house, whenever I asked the locals about it, they would quickly change the subject or look at me with worried eyes. Some even warned me not to go near it. This only made me want to explore it more. One night, I decided to go there on my own. There was something strange about it. Whenever I asked the locals about the house, they quickly changed the subject, as if I had accidentally mentioned something forbidden. Their eyes would become evasive, some would even turn away without saying a word. Others would frown, their faces showing an invisible fear. I remember one time, an elderly woman looked at me with a gaze full of warning, and she simply said, "You shouldn't go there. It's a place no one should go near." But the more I heard those words, the more I felt something strange in my heart. My rational mind told me that these were just superstitions of people who had lived there for too long, but my curiosity kept growing. Were the shadowy figures that the people talked about, the shadow of a strange creature always gliding through the walls at night, real? Or were they just products of imagination, of fear spreading in a quiet and backward town? One afternoon, I stood in the local cafe, observing the people around me, and I heard more stories about that house. It seemed like no one in the town didn't know about it, and everyone had their own reason to stay away from it. I could feel a sense of reluctance in the air whenever the name of that house was mentioned. "That house has been abandoned for a long time," a middle-aged man said, his voice hoarse. "But no one dares to enter, not even to come near it at night. The shadow, it's not human, definitely not." "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a stir in my chest. I was beginning to feel like an outsider, like someone searching for the truth. "That shadow," the man continued, speaking in a whisper as if afraid someone might hear. "It belongs to a vampire, not a human. It always lurks in the dark. And when that house was built, people realized this. The shadow moves in the night, and no one knows what is really going on inside." His words felt like a cold bucket of water poured over me, but at the same time, they pushed me to explore that house even more. I couldn't live with this curiosity forever. I couldn't just listen to the stories without doing anything. Is that strange shadow real? Or is it just the fear that the people created? That evening, as nightfall came, I made my decision. I would go there myself. No one could stop me. That house, with all the rumors, with the shadow that everyone spoke of, would be the first challenge in this journey. I would find the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. The vampire shadow, I thought, was probably just a fictional tale, an exaggeration of fear. But deep down, there was an inexplicable anxiety, as though something was wrong, a vague feeling I couldn't explain. I couldn't let myself be haunted by it for the rest of my life. I had to see it with my own eyes. I had to face it. I stepped out of my small inn, the faint light from a street lamp on the empty street casting shadows that made the surroundings even gloomier. The whole town seemed to be wrapped in an unusual silence, with no sound except for my footsteps. I paused for a moment, looking up at the distant hill where the old house stood, shrouded in the darkness of the night. The path leading to the hilltop was quiet, pitch black. A cold wind blew, rustling the dry leaves. I felt a chill running down my spine, but I couldn't turn back. I kept walking, step by step, filled with a sense of curiosity mixed with fear. Each step was like a challenge, a decision that could not be undone. I had come too close, and now I could only move forward. What surprised me was that the old house still stood tall on the hilltop, as if it had existed for centuries, silently looking down on the town below. It didn't seem frightening, at least not during the day. But now, under the dim light of the moon, the house seemed to change. The crumbling walls, shattered windows, it all created a desolate and eerie sight. I moved closer, hearing my footsteps echoing in the silence. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew, causing the front door of the house to creak with a sound like the breath of something hiding inside. I felt a cold draft from behind the door, as though something was watching me. I stood before the house's door for a while, feeling conflicted. I could turn back now, leave and end this journey. But curiosity, a strong feeling as if there was an invisible pull, stopped me from turning around. I took a deep breath, gathered all my courage, and pushed the ancient door open. I felt as though I was being overwhelmed by something inexplicable, an invisible force pulling me toward the old house. Even though I had entered, I still felt like I hadn't truly entered the house yet. Its shadow, that strange shadow I had heard so much about, was still following me, silently moving in the dark space. That shadow seemed to have a life of its own, not just a hollow phenomenon, but a living entity. It was not simply a reflection of something. It was a being full of paranormal energy, capable of watching, seeking, and invading my space. The air inside the house seemed thick, as if the breath of that shadow had spread throughout the place. Every time I breathed, I felt like the air was heavy, full of the scent of mildew and decay. The space around me seemed to contract, closing in, enveloping me. The dark shapes seemed to beckon, lurking in every corner. My breathing echoed in the silence, but every breath I took was swallowed by the stillness of the house. I slowly stepped deeper, trying to find something to explain the presence of the shadow. The broken mirrors were scattered across the floor, reflecting ghostly images of me, but I knew they were not mine. I looked into a large mirror, shattered, and in it, I saw the shadow. Not mine, but of a creature lurking behind me. The shadow moved, not like a typical shadow, but more like a living being, observing, trying to approach me. I turned around, but there was nothing but darkness. Suddenly, a faint sound came from the end of the hallway. I turned around, seeing a large shadow glide past the window. This shadow wasn't that of a person. It wasn't like any shadow I had seen before. It moved quickly, as though it was running from something or hunting. I couldn't breathe. That shadow, it wasn't human. I knew it for sure. It couldn't be the shadow of a person, but something else, something that didn't belong to this world. Cold and fear started to overwhelm me. The stories of the vampire shadow weren't just tales, it was the truth. And I had awakened it. As soon as the door opened, a cold sensation ran through my body. The door creaked as if it hadn't been opened in a long time. The inside of the house was dark, dusty, and cold. The only light was the faint moonlight streaming through the broken windows. It felt as if someone was watching me, a feeling I couldn't put into words. I couldn't stop. That shadow, the creature I still didn't fully understand, continued to chase me with every step, through every space in the decaying house. The cold, eerie sensation never left me for a second. The walls around me seemed to close in, squeezing me tighter. This space, this house, seemed to have come to life, to know me, and was waiting for something I couldn't yet understand. My vision blurred from fear, and every step I took became heavier. I glanced behind me again, and the shadow was still following me, swallowing the light around me. But this time, it didn't just move like a strange phenomenon. It had a distinct shape, a large, pitch-black creature that didn't have a fixed form but could be clearly felt in its presence. I knew that if I kept running, I wouldn't be able to escape it. I quickly ran through the dark corridors, where broken windows and shattered mirrors lay scattered on the floor. Every mirror, every crack in the walls seemed to bring the shadow back to life, an image I couldn't shake from my mind. I could feel it closing in, almost within reach, just one step away. Unable to take it any longer, I stopped and turned to face the shadow. I didn't know why I had the courage to do so, but I knew that I couldn't keep running away. When the shadow realized I had turned back, a sign to stop from the front, from the shadow that was hanging but stood there. It wasn't the sound of a normal person's breath, but the breath of something ancient, something terrifying. The sound seemed mocking, as if it were trying to dominate me, watching me as a prey being trapped. I took a step closer, even though my heart was pounding, but I felt an inner force pushing me to face this shadow. The shadow, with everything I had heard about it, seemed to be something different, something much more terrifying, but also much stronger. If I didn't confront it now, I would never have the chance again. I took another step toward it, slowly, in the silence, my eyes not leaving the shadow before me. Even if I wanted to turn back, even if I wanted to flee, I knew I couldn't. That shadow had become a part of me, a part of this house, and perhaps a part of myself. When I got closer, the shadow suddenly moved toward me, fast as lightning, but it didn't rush toward me as a predator would. It just floated past me, as if it didn't need to do anything, simply existing, simply present to make me afraid. Suddenly, I felt a strong gust of wind blow through, and shortly after, a loud sound came from within the darkness. I turned around and saw a door wide open, and from within, a strange light shone outward. It wasn't the light of a lamp or natural light, but a dim, eerie glow, as if this house had its own source of light. The door revealed a different space, a space I had never seen before. Inside the door was a room full of mist, with shadowy figures moving around, as if they were waiting for me. I knew at that moment that I couldn't turn back. The shadow had led me into an area from which I could not escape, a place where everything was controlled by it. I stepped into the eerie room, feeling the coldness invade my body. It felt like I was stepping into a place not of this world, a place where all life had been forced into the walls of darkness. And as I moved deeper, an image emerged from the mist. It was a strange image, a creature with a form I couldn't even begin to imagine, a being I couldn't name, but it was clearly part of the vampire shadow I had heard of. Its eyes gleamed in the dark, staring at me as if it knew I had come here to face it. I felt like I had entered a realm where I could never escape. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the darkness, but it wasn't the voice of a human. The voice seemed to come from far away, from an ancient time, as though from an age that had been lost. "You have awakened me," the voice rang out. "And now, you must pay the price." I felt a freezing chill run down my spine. The vampire shadow, the ancient creature, had found me. And I, a prey trapped in eternal darkness, could not escape its pursuit. I ventured deeper inside, step by step, and then I saw it. A shadow, gliding past the window like a ghostly figure. That shadow wasn't the shadow of a person. It wasn't like any shadow I had seen before. It moved quickly, as though it was fleeing from something or hunting. I couldn't breathe. That shadow, it wasn't a human. I knew it for sure. It couldn't be the shadow of a person, but something else, something that didn't belong to this world. The cold and fear started to overwhelm me. The people's stories about the vampire shadow weren't just tales. It was the truth. And I had awakened it. The black sky of night, not a star in sight. I walked down the path, my footsteps echoing in the stillness of the dark night. The cold air enveloped me, as if the very atmosphere carried an invisible threat. Strangely, I didn't feel alone. There was something strange, something following me, from behind or from somewhere in the darkness. I couldn't be sure, but I felt its presence clearly. As I got closer to the old house, the strange sensation grew stronger. I couldn't escape the feeling that someone was watching me from within the darkness, the closed doors waiting for me, as if they had known I was coming for a long time. The cold winds blowing through made me shiver, and every step I took felt like a challenge. The house slowly appeared before me, its shadow stretching across the ground under the dim moonlight. The broken walls, shattered windows, the roof collapsed, yet it still stood there, cold and dark, as if nothing had changed in hundreds of years. The space around it was silent, only the sound of my footsteps and the rustling leaves. I felt a sense of fear spreading in my heart, but I couldn't stop. I had come too far to turn back.